Hello friends, just a reminder, this video is for those of you that absorb information better when you hear it out loud. If you don't need to hear it out loud, everything is on the PowerPoint presentation. You can skip the video and just look at the PowerPoint presentation, okay? Today we're talking about knowing what not to paint. Imagine that the amount of information we choose to put into a painting exists on a scale, with way too much on one side and not nearly enough on the other. If you were to place your failed pictures on one side or the other, which way would the scale tip? I'm guessing that too much side would drop fast. If so, you're in the great majority. If not, I salute you. It's easier to add to a watercolor painting than to take strokes away. Why are we so inclined to overload our pictures? The inner voices that encourage us to keep adding more information are very convincing. Even if you're sure that the paintings you want to make are bold interpretations of just the essential aspects of your subject, you may still be prone to overpainting. In the early stages of learning about a new subject, we're susceptible to the assumption that if the painting in progress doesn't feel quite right, it must need something more. Having not yet internalized the basic structure of the image, we look to the photo or the scene to see if there's something we've left out. And of course, there always is. When it still seems wrong, we find another bit to add. And in this way, we keep cramming in more and more information when the real problem may well be that we already have too much. Sorry, lost track of where I was. Okay, so whether we set up before a plein air subject or a still life or work from photos, we're faced with a nearly infinite amount of visual information. This is why it's so important at the beginning of the painting process to ask yourself, how can I simplify the source material? The human eye can register wonderfully subtle variations in color and value, and it's a real pleasure to indulge this ability. But remember, it can be a separate activity from painting. We are not obliged to put all that information into the picture. Ironically, our job as realist painters most often is to edit out the majority of what we can perceive. Some information is essential, but most of it is optional. Discovering which is largely a matter of getting out of your own way. For example, my first impulse as a painter is to record everything. It feels like my job is to do justice to each separate bit of the scene by including as much information as I can observe. I am supposed to do it. So how can we get permission to paint the pictures we really intend to paint? Since so many of us spend more time on the way too much side of the information scale, it makes sense to explore the rest of the territory, but this can be intimidating. If we believe we're not supposed to go there, it feels like trespassing. It can be effective to set up an exercise that is clearly not a painting. When there's no expectation that this piece of paper might become a keeper, the usual self-imposed restrictions do not apply. It is liberating to make an intentionally oversimplified version of the scene as a temporary license to enter forbidden territory. In the process, you'll also discover a great deal about which features of the subject are the essential ones. How much of what you can see in the photo of this market would you need to include in a painting? The information that registers at first glance is usually enough to tell you what ought to be communicated about a scene. If you find yourself leaning closer to see exactly what all that stuff is, you probably don't really need to know. Identifying the major shapes. You've no doubt heard that it's wise to begin a new subject with a quick sketch or a small study to help distill the scene down to a manageable number of strokes and washes. Every good teacher I've come across recommends some form or other of finding the bones of the image first. Many different preliminary studies can help reduce the image to a very simple form. We will look at 3 examples: a 5-value monochrome study, a 2-layer geometric sketch, and a 3-layer thumbnail sketch. The first step in all 3 exercises is to identify the major shapes. The major shapes are those that need to be separated from each other for the illusion of space to be effective. To decide whether a particular shape plays an important role in describing the space in a scene, try asking yourself if it would matter if it were merged with the adjacent shapes. Would you still be able to tell where everything is in the pictorial space? In this photo, it would be fine, perhaps even best, to think of the stones as a single shape. As a whole, the pile needs to be separated from the workers and the wall, but the individual blocks can be subjugated to the overall shape of the pile. The jumble of stone blocks in this picture looks like a complicated painting subject at first, but remembering to ask if the individual stones need to be separated from each other greatly simplifies the job. This preliminary sketch, which has no more than 5 values, reveals how little specific information will be needed to tell the story. Creating a 5-value monochrome study. A value study helps us understand the dark-light relationships between the big shapes in your composition. This is an essential first step to making a painting that is cohesive. A 5-value version, white, light gray, middle gray, dark gray, and black, can be done quite quickly over a simple drawing of the big shapes. It also provides good practice for seeing in layers. Okay, so what you're going to do is, to start, you're going to choose a color, just one, straight from the tube, that can get dark enough to represent black. It is better not, and I'm sorry if you don't have a tube, a palette works just fine. I don't want to confuse you, okay? So from the palette, something that can get dark enough to represent black. It's better not to make a color by mixing, since that introduces a whole nother variable, so choose a color that's already there. This exercise is designed to focus on value only. Similarly, all paint should be applied to dry paper to keep wetness from distracting your attention away from the value. A door may be important, but the doorknob probably isn't. I've seen some so-called value studies that are in fact very carefully observed monochrome paintings. They're quite beautiful, but as tools designed to reveal the essential elements of the scene, they're not very useful. The best way to find out if something needs to be in the picture is to leave it out. That's important, that's why it's bolded. The best way to find out if something needs to be in the picture is to leave it out. If you're tempted to get fussy about edge quality or texture or any kind of detail, remember, this is not a painting, okay? This is a value study. This is not a finished painting. It is supposed to be too simple. After each step of your study, while you're waiting for the paper to dry, assess how complete the illusion of the light and space and substance feels. Okay, so the first thing you're going to do is you're going to evaluate the subject. Light is an important component of this image. Isolating the variable of value should reveal the role it plays in creating the illusion of sun and shadow. Next, you're going to locate the major shapes in the image. Draw the big shapes, keeping the number down to 10 or fewer. The profile of each shape is all you need to draw. The idea is to locate the shapes, not describe them. Then you're going to reserve the white areas while applying the lightest lights, okay? So starting with the lightest gray, paint the entire page except for any shapes that need to stay white. Is there a feeling of light in the study? What about space, substance? Now you're going to add the middle grays. If you can't decide whether a shape should be light or middle, round it off one way or the other. The finished study will reveal whether you made the right choice. Because remember, this isn't a painting, it's just a study. So it's going to reveal to you whether you should have gone lighter or middle, okay? If you give in to the temptation to embellish a bit, like the dark spots in the dirt piles, keep it very simple. Again, assess the state of the illusion. Light, space, substance. And now you're going to add the dark grays. When the second layer is dry, apply the dark gray over everything except the middle gray, light, and white shapes. Now that the background figure has a dark gray layer and the section of the wall behind him does not, notice how effectively the two separate compared to the previous stage. Now you're going to paint in the darkest darks. The role of the darkest darks is in creating the illusion of light, space, and substance is clear, even in a radically oversimplified image. So once you've completed your study, you're going to evaluate it. When the value study is finished, it can be compared to the source image or the scene to see where adjustments need to be made. Having come over into the realm of too little information, we now have a basis for judging how much more needs to be included. Ask yourself, where do I need more subtlety or specificity? Don't skip this step. A study, as the name implies, is a learning tool. The painting process will be more efficient and your painting more cohesive if you extract all the lessons you can from your preliminary work. In the photo, the two mounds of dirt are so similar in color and value that it seemed sensible to treat them as a single shape. But the study reveals that it would be better to separate them, making it clearer that the one on the right is in the front. The study also reveals that the mound on the left does not separate sufficiently from the wall in the background. It looks okay where there's a shadow behind it, but where the wall's sunlit, only the pencil line separates the two shapes. Perhaps lightening the left mound a little could solve both of these problems. 5 values in this case are not quite enough. There should be a step between light and middle. This is an example of a need for more subtlety. The little raised frame beside the doorway that catches the sun is a fine feature of the photo that I miss. It does an important job describing the light. It's a bit of specific information that will add significantly to the picture without becoming a distraction. It is surprisingly easy to see what is missing and what needs to be changed when the image has been oversimplified. If I had made a complex first attempt, it would be difficult to know which of the too many elements were not necessary. So look at your own value study. What areas do you see that could be adjusted to make a more accurate representation of the scene? Are there areas that should be slightly darker or lighter? Do you maybe need 1 or 2 more values to create an honest depiction? Are there any details that you've left out that you think would be greatly add to your painting without becoming distracting, like the raised area of the door frame? Without adding any paint, with a pencil, make note of these changes on your painting before you turn it in. I want to see you use your value study. I want to see what perspective you gained from it and how you would use it for a real painting. Sound good? So you're going to do a value study with the five values, and you're going to use it to decide if you need more or less and where, and you're going to label it on the painting. Cool?